Hey there, Darren at ProtoPie here, and today I'm going to show you how to build a mobile drop-down menu. This menu is based on the material design exposed drop-down menu pattern, and exposed drop-down menus display the currently selected menu item above the list of options. So let's have a look at the final prototype of this menu here. So I've got my menu sitting here at the top of the screen. I can tap on it to open the menu items, and you can see that we had a little animation on the arrow there, and I've got 3 items to choose from. I'm going to choose item 2, and you can see that item 2 now becomes selected and the menu closes, and I can continue opening it and changing the items from one to the other. Okay, so that's what we're going to be building in this video. So without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so before we get started, let's just go through the structure of the file. If you happen to be a member of my Patreon website, then you'll be able to download this starter file. If you're just watching on YouTube, then you're going to have to recreate your own file, but I'll take you through the structure so you can follow along. Okay, so over here on the left-hand side, we'll just look through the layers panel. So I've got a main container group called menu, and inside of that container, I've got 2 subcontainers, one for the header and one for the list. Now, the list is currently set to opacity of 0. I'll just bring that up so we can just have a quick look at it. So here's my list. You can see the item 1, 2, and 3 inside of here. And if I just twizzle that down, you can see I've got separate container groups for each one. And then within each one, I've got a text field, and I've also got a base rectangle. Okay, so if we just have a quick look at the header group, let me just turn this list down for a second. If we have a look at the header group, you can see I've got a native text label, which is called selected label. I've got a native graphic. This could just be an SVG, but I converted it to a native graphic for the arrow. And I've also got a base rectangle for the color as well. Okay, so that's the structure of the file. We've got the main container size is set to the header size, which is 56 pixels deep. So our list kind of sits outside of that, but that's invisible. Okay, so now we've gone through the structure of the menu. Let's go ahead and start adding some interactions. Okay, so the first thing we're going to build is something called the state manager. And we're going to use the state manager to trigger our open and closing interactions. And that's going to enable us to compartmentalize the interactions for open and close into 2 discrete blocks. It will make more sense as we go along, but it's a really good way of organizing your ProtoPie files, especially as you get into designing and creating more complex interactions and UI components. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our menu container, and I'm going to select the header container inside of here. And I'm going to come over to my triggers, my interaction panel, and I'm going to add a tap trigger. Okay. To this tap trigger, I'm going to add a condition. And I'm going to call this condition open menu. Okay. Next, I'm going to come down to my variables panel. So we're going to use variables to track the position of certain things. We effectively need to create a toggle so we can toggle from the open state to the closed state. And to do that, I'm going to use a variable. So I'm just going to use a for this scene variable. And I'm going to call this toggle. And we're going to keep this as a number variable. Okay, back to the condition. To the condition, I want to come to this condition that I've just created previously, and I'm going to choose the toggle variable that we just created. And I'm going to look for when the toggle variable value equals 0. Okay, so if it's 0, it means it's closed. 1 would mean it's open. So I'm currently in the condition where I'm going to be opening the drop down. So I want to check to see if it's closed. I only want to open it if it's already closed. Okay. Okay, so I'm now going to just duplicate this condition. So Command D on the Mac or Control D on Windows. And I'm going to rename my second condition close menu. And I'm going to come into the condition parameters and I'm going to change the value to equal 1. So we want to check to see if the toggle is 1 before we close the menu. Okay. Okay, so next up, I'm going to add a send response to the open menu condition. And I'm going to call this send response underscore open menu. And I'm using the underscore, let me just change that to a lowercase p. I'm just using the underscore as a way of naming my internal kind of pre-rolled functions. So these discrete blocks of interactions which I'm going to use send and receive to call those. So it's just a way I like to denote them so I can instantly recognize that they're like an internal block of interactions. Okay, but you can name them whatever you wish. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so we're going to come into this send response and we're going to leave the channel as the current scene. And we're going to add a message, and the message is going to be exactly the same as what we've called the condition. So I'm just going to copy that. It's going to paste that into the message here. And that's going to be underscore open menu. So that's the message we're going to send. Okay. So we're now going to copy this send response and we're going to paste it into the close menu. And we're just going to rename it. So this one's going to be close menu. And again, we want that message to be close menu inside of the property details pane. And there you go. Okay, so now we've got our menu state manager set up. So when we tap our drop down, it's going to look at these two conditions. So if it's an open menu, it's going to look to see if the toggle equals 0, and if so, it's going to send the open menu message. And for the close menu, it's going to look to see if the toggle is equal to 1, and if that's true, it's going to send the close message. Okay, so that's all we need to do on the state manager. Next up, we're going to be creating the open menu state. Okay, in this section, we're going to be creating the open menu state. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my interactions panel and I'm going to add a receive trigger. Okay, and I'm going to name this underscore open menu. And I'm going to come over to the details panel and I need to choose one of my messages that I set up in the state manager in the previous section. And for this one, I'm going to choose the open menu message. Okay, so next up, we want to show the list when the menu opens. So this is the first part of the open menu interaction that we're going to create. Okay, so inside of my receive trigger, I am going to add a scale response. And I'm going to choose the menu container. And I'm going to make sure it's on scale 2. And I'm going to scale the height effectively. I want to scale the height of my container. So because the height of the container has got the background color to it. Okay, so I need this value to be the combined height of both the header and the list. So we can see that this height is 56 and then the list height here is 168. Okay, so that altogether is 224. So I'm just going to pump 224 into the height here. Okay, and next, and I'm going to leave all of the durations as they are. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so next I want to show the list. So to do that, I'm going to add an opacity response. And I'm going to choose my list container. And I'm going to set the opacity to 100. I'm going to set the duration to 0.1, and I'm just going to delay it by 0.1. I need to allow time for the menu to open, the background of the menu to open before I show the list of options. Okay. Next up, I'm going to add an assign response. And we're going to use the assign response to change the value of our toggle variable. So remember, it's the toggle variable that's controlling the opening and the closing states. So I'm going to select my toggle variable. We have now, in this particular block, opened the menu, so I want to set the value to 1. Remember, 1 means the menu is open. Okay, I think it's time to have a quick test to see if we're on track. So over here inside the preview window, I can tap on my item, and you can see that that's scaled open my menu, and it's also showing the items inside my menu, but you can see they're in the wrong position. We want to add some extra motion just to make this a bit more believable. And because let me just restart this, because when I tap the menu, it scales down to open, I want to give the feeling that the items inside are also moving downwards. And the second thing we want to do is we want to twizzle the chevron around up 180 degrees so that it looks, so basically we have an affordance for an open and a close. So a few little motion tweaks just to kind of add a little bit more believability to it. So let's do that now. So let's just reset this, come back to our file. So I'm going to come back to my open menu. I'm going to add a rotate. And I'm going to choose my chevron graphic here. And I want to make sure that it's on rotate 2. I just want to have complete control. And we're going to rotate to 180 degrees. So it does a half rotation. Okay, next we're going to add a move response. And we want to move the list. And we actually want to move it by 56 pixels. So basically, it's currently set at 0, and we want it to move to the bottom here, and the height of our header is 56, so that's how much we want to move it to. So in the Y value field, we're going to type 56, and that should be all we need to do. We're going to leave the duration at 0.2 because we want it to move at the same rate as the scaling of the menu moves. Okay, so let's come over to preview and give it another test. So if I tap on my item, on my header item, we can see now that the menu moves down nicely, and we got our chevron, which is rotating to denote that the menu's open. Okay, so that about wraps up this section of creating the open state. In the next section, we're going to create the closed state. Okay, so welcome to the third section of this video. Glad you made it this far. In this section, we're going to be creating the close menu state. So this is going to be the reverse, obviously, of the open menu state. Why did I say that? I don't know. Okay, so this should be fairly more straightforward than the last one because we just need to change some values. There's going to be a lot of duplication going on. Okay, so talking of duplication, the first thing we're going to duplicate is the whole of the receive trigger for open menu. So we're just going to do a Command D or Control D on Windows for that. And we're going to rename this close menu. And we want to change the message also. We want to choose the close menu message here. Okay, coming on to the scale response. We want to change the height back to 56. So remember our initial default height is 56 pixels. So we're just going to pump 56 into there. For our opacity response, we need to reverse this. So we're just going to pull the opacity down to 0. And this time I want to change the delay because we're going in the opposite direction. So I don't want there to be any delay at all. So we're going to change the delay to 0. Okay. And basically the reason we're doing that is we want the menu to hide before it scales up. Otherwise you'll get this weird overlap. Okay. Moving on. So the assign response, so this is our toggle. So we're now going in the other direction. So we want to reset the toggle variable to be 0, which means our menu is closed. And for rotate, we want to rotate our chevron back to 0, and we actually want to change the direction as well. So we want it to go back the way it came effectively. So we're just going to shift over to a counterclockwise. And then finally, for our move response, we're going to change the list to move from 56 to 0. So it's going to move back into its original position. Okay, so that should be all we need to do. Let's come over to our preview menu, give that a test. So we tap once to open, and we tap once to close. Open, close. There you go. Okay, so that completes the close menu state section. And moving on to the final section, we're going to create the interaction so you can actually select items, and the header bar is going to be updated with the item that's selected. So see you there. Okay, so welcome to section 4. And in this section, we're going to create the interactions inside of our menu so you can actually select items and they actually populate the header above. Okay, so let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new trigger. We're going to add a touchdown trigger. And this touchdown trigger is going to target item 1, so the item 1 group, subgroup inside of our list group. And to this trigger, we're going to add an opacity response. And we're going to select for our opacity the item 1 base. And we're going to select its opacity to 100. Okay, so we're basically using the base as the touchdown hit state. Okay. And we also want to change the duration to 0. We want this to happen immediately. So we're just going to do that. Okay, so we're now going to add a touch up trigger. And similarly, we're going to select the item 1 group. And we can just copy the opacity from touchdown because we just need to reset this, and we're just going to paste that into touch up. And we're just going to reverse this animation so it's going to opacity of 0. Okay, so we've effectively now got our touch up and touchdown for the first item. So I'm just going to group these two together. So select them both and hit Command G, and I'm just going to call this item 1. And what we need to do is we just need to do this for the other 2 items. So pretty much exactly the same as what we did before. We just need to change the target. So I'm just going to do that quickly. If you can do that as well, and I'll meet you when we've done the other 2 items. Okay, so I've now effectively connected the other 2 items up to our other 2 list items. So we've now got 3 identical sets of touch triggers. Next up, we're going to connect them up so they actually change the header. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to achieve this is I'm going to add another variable for this scene. This is going to be a text variable. And I'm going to call this selected item. Okay. Next up, I'm going to add a detect trigger. And I'm going to name this selected item. And this is going to detect changes in the selected item variable. Okay, so within this detect, we're going to add a text response. And we're going to target the selected label. So this is the label that's sitting in the header here. We're going to come into this text response and we're going to change the content to formula. And we want to set its value to the same value as selected item. So we're just going to choose the selected item variable here in the formula window. Okay, so next up, we're going to go back to our item 1. And if we go into the touch up trigger, we're going to add another response. We're going to add an assign response here. And we're going to choose our newly created selected item variable. And we're going to set the formula to the text item 1. So this is the text that's going to appear in the header. So to do that, we're going to have to put that in double quotes. So we're going to open up double quotes, type item space 1 and close our double quotes. Okay, cool. So we now can copy this assign and we can paste it into the touch up triggers of the other items. So we're going to come to item 2, paste it in, change the value to item 2, and then come into item 3, paste it in and change the value to 3. Okay, so the final thing we want to do is when we select the item, we want to close the menu. So because we've compartmentalized our open menu state and our close menu state in these handy triggers, we can effectively reuse this. So this is the real power of creating these functional blocks of interactions that you might want to use over and over. You can just call them in multiple other triggers and you don't have to create all of that duplicate interaction. So I'm just going to copy the close menu send response here up here. So I'm just going to do a command copy there. And again, we're going to come into our touch up triggers and we're just going to paste it in. On item 2. And then finally inside of item 3. Okay, so when we tap on one of the items, when we touch up, so effectively when we come off of the tap, it's going to change the opacity. So we're going to get a little grey block showing when we tap to give it a bit of an affordance that we've tapped it. We're going to assign the value to the variable, to this selected item variable. And we're going to call the close menu functional block here, and it's going to run all of this as well. Okay, so let's come over to our preview menu and see if that all works. So we're going to open our menu and we're going to select item 2. And you can see that item 2 has now populated in the header and the menu has closed. Okay, so we can keep doing that and changing. So there, hey presto, you now have a working dropdown. Pretty cool, eh? So that brings us to the end of this video. If you made it this far, then thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video to help spread the word and subscribe to the channel if you want to be notified when I post new videos. Okay, so have a great day wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you next time.